So today we've got a really interesting time that we're going to spend exploring the life of Jacob. Now, Jacob is not someone that I would confess that I've spent a lot of time exploring his life. There's some other people that I've spent a little bit of time looking at and probably learnt, if you said to me, what's some of the things you've learnt from the Bible? I don't think I'd give you a Jacob story. And so I thought it might be really interesting, at least for me, and it has been in preparation, to explore the life of Jacob and then pull just a couple of things out of that life. Now, today pretty much is going to be, in part, an explosion of his life. And there's going to be a couple of things that we're going to look for. So if you just want to put that first one up for us, I thought I might just start with actually giving you a real big snapshot of who Jacob was. And hopefully you can sort of read that, but there's a really interesting progression in the life of Jacob that perhaps you might pick up. And if I was to preempt what that might look like, I think he starts off as a little bit of a deceiver. And so you've all heard of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Like, that's kind of the founding fathers of the people of God. And so we're looking at the third in those. So he follows after. Abraham gets called out, Genesis 12, Genesis 15. I'm going to create you to be an amazing people. Stars in the sky, grains of sand on the beach. These are going to be your descendants. I will be your God and you will be my people. And so then we have Isaac coming along, and Isaac's another interesting character that I haven't quite looked into too much. And then comes along Jacob, and we've got Jacob. Basically, Jacob was a twin. Do we have any twins? A twin here? We've got some twins that might be out there. Yes. You're a twin as well. Were you born first or second? No. Peter, first or second? First. You were born first and first as well. Well, Jacob pretty much gets his name because he was born second and he was hanging on to the heel of his brother who came out first. And that's where he comes from. He's almost called the usurper. That's kind of what his name means. And it's really interesting. I think names have both a foretelling and a forthtelling kind of, they say that's who he is, but also that's perhaps who he might become. And we're going to look a little bit more about names as this message goes on. So, he gets born, his mum favours him, his dad favours his brother. One day his brother, who is described as an outdoorsy kind of guy, is outside. He's been hunting for who knows how long. He comes in and he says, I really need that bowl of red stew that you've got. And, Jacob says, well, I'm not going to just give it to you. Why don't you just give me your birthright? Yeah, okay, for sure. I'm famished, I'm going to die, I'll do it. And I think that's where the seed for Jacob pretty much says, I think I can manipulate people. I'm pretty good at this stuff. So then we've got this. Now, his father, who was, don't forget in the line, and I'm sure he would have been told, Abraham, my father, Isaac, has said that we are going to become the people of God. Oh, wow, that is amazing. Now, Esau is next in line for that. And one day, Isaac's wife hears him saying to his son, go out into the field, get me that game that I truly love to eat, and I'm going to bless you. Everything I have will become yours. And then his wife says to her favorite son, Jacob, quick, let's do something. I'm going to cook some stew. I'm going to cook some food. I know your brother's a little bit hairy. Let's just put some lambskin on your arms. This is Jacob. Okay, I'll do it, Mum. He puts some lambs, come a bit closer. Can I feel you? He touches the lambskin. This is who Jacob is. He deceives for that birthright. Now, that's a significant thing. And then all of a sudden, he realizes what's happened. And his mum says, actually, I think Esau's not too happy about this. You better go. But before you go, let's see if we can make it your dad's idea. And so then she says to Isaac, do you know what? Let's not get Jacob to choose a wife from this area. Let's go back to his homeland. Let's go back to where they're from and have your partner from there. So anyway, he flees. So and apparently it's going to be Dad's idea. So Dad says, go back and choose a wife from where we come from. Then we get to the point where on his way, he has this encounter where he has a vision. He puts a stone under his head and he sleeps with a stone pillow, and he sees a ladder where angels are ascending and descending, and God is there, and God gives him a blessing. God basically says, I'm the Lord God of your father. I'm going to give you the same sort of blessing that Abraham got. Bible wasn't written, but the 12 and then 15. Genesis 12 and Genesis 15. And it's like, wow, God was in this place and I didn't know it. Moves on. And now this is where things start to change a little bit for our friend Jacob. He goes to Laban and he says, I like the look of this woman, one of your daughters. I'd love to marry her, please. And he says, yeah, sure, no problem. And so it comes along to the wedding night. He gets deceived. And then apparently he doesn't quite end up marrying the girl of his dreams. It's dark one night and he marries someone else, another daughter. Oh, what did you do to me? Work another 7 years, we'll give you another daughter. Okay, so he works another 7 years, gets the daughter that he wants, and thinks, okay, I've had my 12 kids now. I want to go back home to where I was from, where my father's from, and where my brother's from. Yeah, no problem, you can do that. I just want to take the sheep and the goats that are mine. Okay, well, what about if we make a bit of a plan of where the sheeps are any sheep that are speckled, you can have them, any that are not. Yeah, and there's all these different miracles. I'm saying all this to remind us of the Jacob of the Sunday school stories, but what's starting to happen in the actual progression of things is he's gone from deceiver to being deceived. Now he says, okay, I'm rich, I have this blessing. Every time I put these branches in front of the goats and the sheep, they have speckled children. I can actually have them. They're going to be mine. Let's go back, but I'm still worried, even though it's been 20 years, of what my brother Esau is going to do. He always was the hunter, and I was the one that favoured tents. I don't know what favoured tents means, but I think he was an indoors type guy. So he's on his way back. He's scared, and he thinks, we're getting close. I'll send someone ahead. I'll send everyone across the river. I'm going to camp by myself just here tonight. We'll see how we go. Then, for some reason, out of the blue, he wrestles a man. I've looked into this. The word used is man, and it's been used 1,000 times to mean man. Jacob wrestles a man, and at the end of it, he says, I've seen God face to face. So there's something else going on that we might get into in a little bit more. And then the story continues where he actually comes back. He becomes blessed, everyone's okay with him, and sooner or later he has his 12 children. One of them, Joseph, kind of goes in a way that he doesn't quite expect, i.e. his brothers try and kill him and send him into slavery. Joseph's got a brilliant story, but we're not looking at him today. And then, after a little bit of time, the whole family ends in Egypt, and they stay there for 400 years till Moses comes. So, you might think, Robert, why on earth did you just tell me all of that? You took a whole bunch of the time that you've got to talk to give us a snapshot of who Jacob is. But I think it's really important to understand not just people from the Bible, but when we look at these one little passages sometimes, we forget about who they are in their life journey. He started off in this direction, and he's gone through all these kind of things. Now keep that in mind as we focus on just two supernatural events that we have. So if we can just go to the two things that I thought we could focus on today is the Jacob's ladder and then the wrestling with God. So I thought we might just start with the Jacob's ladder, and I'm going to read where it comes from in Genesis 28. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. He wakes up and he said, this was amazing. I'm going to create an altar here. And it's actually the first time in the Bible that we have a reference to the house of God. The stone is the house of God. But ultimately he says, this is the house of God, the gate of heaven. Now I just want to take a slight detour because I think it's important to map things together. In John 1, there's a really interesting story that Jesus, he's only just started his ministry. He's still calling people out. Let me just change some glasses for a sec. He's still calling people out, and I'll just read it again. Hopefully you can follow this. The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said, follow me. Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael and told him, we found the one Moses wrote about in the law, about who the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Ha! Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? Nathanael asked. And Philip says, come and see. When Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said of him, he is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. How do you know me? Nathanael asked. And Jesus said, well, I saw you while you were still under the orange tree before Philip called you. Fig tree or orange tree. Then Nathanael declared, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel. And this is the bit that I really want us to pay attention to for a second. Jesus said, you believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree, and you're going to see greater things than that. He added, very truly I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. That to me sounds pretty much like the picture of the vision that Jacob had. And I think he's pretty much saying, I am the gate of heaven. And we see that referenced a little bit more specifically later on. But Jesus is saying, I'm the fulfillment of that image that you had. You saw angels ascending and descending. You saw the Father. You know it's the gate of heaven. I'm the gate of heaven, which I think is awesome. Jesus says, that's who I am. Part 2, the second story that I want to look at. So that's the first supernatural event. Those that see heaven. He called the place Bethel. Part 2, Jacob wrestling. Now we're going to actually spend a little bit more time in this for the rest of the message. And basically he has this, I'm going to read it in a second. He has this encounter, and at the end of the encounter, the angel God says, I'm going to rename you Jacob. You're now going to be called Israel. Israel means those that wrestle with God and man. So can we just start to read this passage? And this is the passage. I know I'm reading a little bit of the Bible, but I figure you'd rather hear the Bible than Robert. So let's just have a look, if we can now, as we go through these passages. Genesis 32. I'll just stand to the side because I actually want to read it almost together. So, no feedback? Go there. Verse 1, Jacob went on his way and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's camp. So he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Actually, let me just pause for 1 second. God, I pray as we read through your word that you will just make the things stand out to us that you need to stand out to us. Father, speak to us as we open this. And for each of us, we might find something to hold in our heart. Amen. So Jacob went on his way. Angels met him. He's on his way, don't forget, back to Esau. Jacob sent messages before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And the messengers returned after meeting with Esau, saying, We came to your brother Esau, and he's coming to meet you. There's 400 men with him. And Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Lord, you said to me, return to your country and to your kindred that I might do you good. And I'm not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and the faithfulness that you've shown your servant, for only with my staff I crossed the Jordan, and now I've become 2 camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he might come, he might attack me and the mothers of my children. But you said, God, you said, I'm surely going to do you good, and I'm going to make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for the multitudes. One more, yep. And that same night he arose, he took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, his 11 children, crossed the ford of Jabbok. He sent them against the sea and everything else that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the day's broken. But Jacob said, I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, what's your name? And Jacob said, my name's Jacob. And then he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and you've prevailed. And Jacob said, well, what's your name? But the man said, well, why is it you ask my name? And then he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. So let me just ask you, and I mean for some interaction here, in those verses, I know there was 3 and I know sort of read for a little bit, what stood out to people as, oh wow, that's interesting, or okay, that just stood out to me today, or what stood out to anyone? I'm looking for a couple of people just to sort of shout out what stood out to them. He started off deceiver and then he became deceived. Anyone else? Jacob was afraid. I think he really was afraid. Yeah. Yeah. So there's some humility there, which we might not have seen before from the guy that said, okay, I'll give you some stew if you give me your birthright. Yeah. I like it that I think he's starting to see God. He's had some promise, he's had some amazing interactions, he's seen the ladder of heaven. He's wrestled, and now he's saying, I've seen God face to face, but I've lived. And there's something to me about the whole idea of wrestling with God that is probably, I think, worthwhile spending some time on. Now, if you're like me, you kind of think that most of the time when it comes to prayer, I really want it to be that lovely interaction where, oh God, I thank you for this. Or like we prayed at the start for Sylvia, God, she is just so amazing. I thank you for bringing her into the life of this church. And that's kind of a way that we might pray. But it's really interesting. I think that sometimes prayer in the Bible, and particularly the New Testament, is described as a wrestle. And I think sometimes life with God can be a wrestle. And one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to bring this up as a topic, I know for most of us, that's not something new. All of you have had challenges in your lives, whether it's been in the past fortnight or whether it's been a long time ago. That's not something new. But something that I think is worth repeating is the fact that God invites us to wrestle with him. Typically, I think, when tough times happen, one thing that can have, the effect that it can have is that we tend to withdraw. We withdraw from people, we withdraw from our social interactions, and sometimes I think we withdraw from God. Sometimes we're angry at God, we don't know what to say. Sometimes we're confused and we say, if you were a good God, wouldn't you? We don't really want to engage with God because in my heart, I don't want to be the person that's ungrateful because I know that God's done everything. It's his breath in my lungs. And so I don't want to be the person that comes to God and says, what on earth are you doing? But I think there's something in this message that actually helps me when I'm wrestling. And there's been a few times that I've wrestled with God, and I'm probably still in the middle of a couple of different areas where I'm saying to God, what is going on? And I just want to encourage those people that are actually having a challenging time to spend some time wrestling with God. And I'm going to look at a couple of different ideas that we might be able to do that in a second. Colossians 4 says, here's what it says. Epaphras, who's one of you, is a servant of Christ, greets you, always wrestling on your behalf in his prayers, that you may stand mature and fully assured in all the will of God. So Epaphras wrestles with God, that the people that he was talking to in the church in Colossae, but also us, become mature. Sometimes it can be a wrestle to maturity. And so I just want to encourage those people that think that I'm not going so well with God, that maybe my relationship with God is on a downward sort of, vacillation. I wonder if sometimes the wrestling with God is not so much a downward, but it's actually part of the process of moving forward. So I think that's an interesting thought that I've been actually taking away as I've put this message together. But prayer can be a wrestle. James 1 says something that I really struggle with. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you might be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to him. And I don't know, I want to be that person that perseveres and receives the crown of life. There's someone that I've been following for a long time, and she's got this saying, and she's had some challenging times: if you don't quit, you win. And I think that's one of my mantras with God. If you don't quit, you win. Because sometimes it's like, all right, I'm going to put that on hold. That area is too hard. Rest of my life's going okay, but that one, I'm just going to, in a sense, deny what's going on. But I think if you don't quit, you win. So let's have a look a little bit more deeply. We'll go past the one, Norman, that says the value of the wrestle to, that one, that's a good one. We'll stay there. How did Jacob become Israel? Do we want to do that? Can I backtrack to the one just after the picture of the two of them? Yeah. And just for a second, just contemplate the understanding of names. Now, if I was to do a poll and I would say to you, do we want to become the people of God? And our name should be those that wrestle with God or those that see heaven. Which name do you reckon we should choose? Do we want to become the people of Israel, or do we want to become the people of Bethel? The house of God, the gate of heaven. What do you want? Now, I would say, this is Robert talking, I want to be known as the people that see angelic things happen, that see God, that have these interactions where God steps forward and says, I've remembered my promises. Brent, I've remembered my promises to you. God, I am going to make them happen. I want everyone to know that's who I am. I'm that kind of person. that's not what the people of God are called. And I think somehow that has to be significant. I think it has to. We are called those that wrestle with God and man. Now, hopefully there's a little bit of sophistication when it comes to wrestling. It doesn't necessarily mean opposition or fighting. It means those that don't avoid and those that actively interact to engage, to become intimate. If I'm wrestling, let's say I'm wrestling with my boys, there's no way that at the end of it, you have to be close to wrestle. You know, if me and Norman had wrestle, I'm going to be so weird thinking I don't even want to touch him. But there's an intimacy that comes with the wrestle. And I think in part, that's one of the reasons why we are called the people of Israel, those that wrestle with God and man. And if you are to walk away with anything, I just want to leave you with that. Do you call them seesaw? Seesaw. Are we Israel or are we those that see heaven? And why did God choose to call us Israel? I still don't know. Got some thoughts. I'm trying to see the good in it. But I want to be both. And I don't think it's mutually exclusive. But we're called the people of Israel. So can we just move forward to a few more slides and just figure out, just see what we can gain from this person that, like Joe says, was a deceiver, became deceived, and then moved into humility. What can we learn from this interaction where Jacob wrestles? So, sorry, let me just find my page. I think the first thing as I was reading through those chapters that chapter, Jacob stopped when he noticed angels. They actually, in that very first verse, he noticed the angels, Manahem, and he said, all right, let's stop here. One thing that I want to learn from that is I want to notice angels as well. I want to notice God's activity. And then when that happens, I want to be prepared to stop. And so I think that's an important lesson right from the start, becoming familiar with God's ways, becoming familiar with his messengers. Now, his messengers aren't those creatures it's really funny. Sometimes, most of the time, angels in the Bible are depicted as, whoa, don't be afraid. Whenever we talk about this Jacob's ladder, like the pictures we've seen in classical, romantic sort of, there's this beautiful cherubim coming up and down. I still want to see angels. I want to be like the servant, Elisha's servant Gehazi. Open his eyes. There's more with us than there is with them. But I think the other part of his messengers are not just angels, it's us. I want to be the person that stops when I hear angels, when I hear Neil say something from God to me. So we need to start to notice when God is speaking. Let's stop and notice the angelic. Now, if you again, can you just put while this is happening? Oh yeah, we'll do that. Jacob cried to God and said, God, you said, whatever the promise is. Now, whether it's God, you said to Brent, these are my promises. I'm going to bring you into this area. I'm going to fulfill you. I'm going to get X, Y, and Z come to you. I'm going to have a family. I'm going to have health. When that's not happening, I think it's really helpful for us to say, God, you said that this would happen. And that's part of wrestling. I haven't looked at it today because it's, in a sense, too obvious. But the Psalms are pretty much wrestling with God, almost all of them. My life's not good. God, you're good. Come help me. Thank you. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to summarize the structure of a psalm, but typically a lot of them run along those lines. So what I would suggest is notice when we think God is working, God is moving, when the angels are with us, and let's stop. Cry out to God and say, God, you promised to love me. You promised never to leave me. You promised that you would make my paths straight, if I acknowledge you in all my ways. And let God know the things that he has said is going to happen in your life. There's another element that I notice when this message where Jacob sort of sent everyone across the river and then he had this vision, is that he was alone. And I think sometimes it's helpful to actually spend some time alone with God. I don't think I necessarily need to say much more about that, but it's your responsibility to connect with God. Last couple of things. Jacob was tenacious. He wrestled all night. Now, for some of you, that might mean that you've been praying for 3 months. Or for 26 years. I don't know how some of you have got children that you've been praying for longer than 26 years or 30. There's a tenacity, there's a perseverance that is part of wrestling with God. And he wrestled all night and he said, I'm not going to go until you bless me. And I think that's something that's valid for us to say to God. God, I'm not going to leave you in my thoughts. I'm not going to disengage from this process of saying, I need your help, come and rescue me, until something changes. Until my child, my daughter, my mother-in-law, my whatever it is that you need to have happen changes. Until I feel peace in the situation where there is turmoil. And the last point I just want to draw from what we've seen with Jacob is that he knew who he was wrestling. Like I mentioned briefly, Jacob wrestled a man, and I don't know, I've tried to look into it, was it an angel, was it whatever, but the word is man, that's who it was. Jacob wrestled a man, but at the end of it he said, I've seen God face to face. So know what's happening. Our battle is not against spiritual, flesh and blood, but spiritual forces. I mean, there's a battle. So know who it is that you're wrestling. Are you wrestling God? Are you wrestling circumstances? Are you wrestling your partner that's annoying you? Are you wrestling these things? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes there's something else happening. So when you're alone, when you've stopped, when you've noticed God's actions, when you've actually said to God, I need your help, spend some time and realize what's happening. If you're wrestling with God, focus on that. It's not an easy thing to do. I can't believe I'm standing here saying wrestle with God. Honestly. But I am encouraging you because that's the model that we have here in the Bible. I would love to say, just pray once and trust in God's faithfulness. And sometimes that's the case. But at the same time, I think there's some people here that need to wrestle with God a little bit more. So our conversations can be a wrestle. Our conversations can be a challenge. Just go to the next one. It's not always going to be easy, and life can be a challenge. And can we just go to the next one as well? But here's the one thing that I pretty much want to say to you all and remind you of. The nature of God. God referred to Israel as his people. God referred to Israel, the new name. God referred to Israel as his treasured possession, the apple of his eye. If any of you have read Song of Solomon's, he talks about being altogether, you my people, you my lover, my darling, there's no flaw in you. God loves you. And so we can come to God and wrestle. We wrestle with a God who loves us. You have stolen my heart, my sister, my bride. There's a verse that some people might have memorized. John 3:16. God loved the world. And I just want to finish with this last verse from Matthew 11 because there's just such a gentleness in the person with whom we wrestle. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So can I just invite the band back up? I just want to encourage you that there's value in the wrestle. God calls us to wrestle, and we are called those that wrestle. But we wrestle with a God who loves us. Let's pray. God, I just pray that you will help us, that your Spirit within us will just show us how to have a deeper relationship with you. Father, that you will just show us that you are kind, you are safe, and you are strong. For those of us that sometimes have the picture of Job 38:39, who are you? Were you there? Do you know where the snow comes from? And might even be slightly scared of you. Father, I pray that we might see your kindness, that we might know that you are a God of love. You are a powerful God of love, and that you are strong enough to handle our questions and our queries, and you have good for us. Father, I thank you that every perfect gift comes from you, that you are the one that is above us, and that in time, when we stand the test, we will receive the crown of life that you've promised to us. Father, help us persevere. Help us finish your work of engaging with you and engaging with others, so that you might be glorified. And God, you are beautiful, and you call us beautiful too. So we rest in your presence. Amen.